Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Is there going to be food in this house today or what? The father of the family asked loudly and indignantly. Benjamin, honey, but we just had dinner. Kathy looked surprised at her husband, who was sitting in front of an empty plate, holding a spoon in his hand and looking at her expectantly. She had fed the whole family a modest dinner and was determined not to understand exactly what was required of her. The children had long since eaten and gone to their rooms to do their own things. "Oh, so it was dinner?" Benjamin asked mockingly. "I thought dinner should have some meat in it, at least in a man's dinner. You're the one who can get by with a cabbage leaf for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm the one who works and brings money into the family. And as I thought, I had the right to expect a decent meal for that money." Kathy bit her lip. She belatedly realized that the old story was starting again, repeating itself every time the month came to an end. Each time, her husband approached this conversation very differently than the previous one. That was why the woman didn't immediately realize what he meant. She sighed heavily. "I didn't want to start this useless argument again, which would only lead to another quarrel and nothing more." She had heard all of Benjamin's arguments many times before, and many times she had answered them with her own. But they had never been able to come to an agreement. Nothing new. Kathy was sure of it. Neither of them had come up with anything, which meant that the continuation of this conversation would be as pointless as before. Still, she knew her husband was waiting for her answer, and keeping silent wasn't the answer either. 2 or 3 times she had tried this tactic before, and the result was not to her liking at all. "Benjamin," Kathy began gently, "we've had this discussion many times before. Should we start this again? It is." Her husband interrupted her firmly. "We're going to have this conversation until the situation changes. Or, to be more precise, until you get your act together and go to work. I can't, after all, drag you all around my neck forever." Kathy spluttered. "Honey, how can I go to work? They're not taking the little ones to daycare yet. There's no room anywhere. We can't afford a nanny, even if I got a job somewhere. But other people manage somehow, without any nannies. Other people have grandparents, sisters and brothers, someone else. But we have no one. I'm an orphan, and your parents don't want to take care of the kids, even for half a day. So I could get a part-time job. Don't put this on my parents again. They raise their own kids, and they don't have to take care of yours." Kathy froze on the spot, even stopped washing the dishes, which she had begun to do during this awkward conversation. The word alone hurt her, as if her husband had hit her. However, she wasn't sure physically hitting her wouldn't have come out less painful. "What do you mean with mine?" she exclaimed. "They are our children, Benjamin. You wanted them as much as I did." Benjamin grinned wickedly. "I did, but I didn't," he said. "It's not like we agreed that I'd have to carry the whole lot on my back. I thought that you'll sit on maternity leave for a while, and then, like all normal people, you'll go back to work. And now that you're a housewife, the kids are your responsibility, and I have nothing to do with them." Kathy felt as if someone was squeezing her throat with strong fingers. These statements were something new. Benjamin had never made such statements before. Yes, he complained that he had to feed his family alone, on his salary, which was not very high. His wife couldn't provide him with what he thought he needed, but never before had he claimed that their joint children had nothing to do with him. Benjamin, however, as if reading her thoughts, and certainly seeing her condition perfectly well, decided, it seems, to finally finish his wife. "And as for the younger ones, which you, so actively covering your laziness," he said, so I'm not sure that it's from me. I worked all day while you and Michael were on maternity leave. There's no telling who might have been visiting you during that time." Of course, Kathy couldn't take such unfair accusations any longer. Gasping, choking with tears, almost unable to see her way, she rushed out of the kitchen and, not realizing how she had done it, found herself in the nursery. 6-year-old Michael was looking after his younger brother and sister. Surprised, he looked up at her. "Mom?" he asked in an unusually serious tone for his age. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, son. Everything is fine." Kathy belatedly, realizing her mistake, tried to inconspicuously wipe away her tears. The boy looked at her carefully, then shifted his gaze to the younger children and nodded slowly. Obviously, he decided that his mother didn't want to disturb the little ones, and that was why he was trying to pretend that everything was fine. Kathy didn't try to dissuade him, but just quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. She hoped that the next day, Michael would have more important things to do and would not remember the incident. The woman had no idea where to go with her grief. There were only 2 rooms in their apartment, a child's room and an adult's room, and the second room was where her husband could come at any moment. Kathy didn't want to see him now. Besides, she suspected that he would not give up his favorite subject so easily and would continue to annoy her with his remarks. There was only one way out, despite the lateness of the hour, and that was to leave the apartment. Of course, leaving the children virtually alone was not the best solution. On the other hand, in such a state, she obviously will not be able to interact with them normally. And therefore, whether she is in the apartment or not does not play a special role. The younger ones would still be left in Michael's care. At least Kathy had no doubt that he would put them to bed properly and go to bed on time. Her son was responsible beyond his years, loved to mess around with his brother and sister. Of course, the woman tried not to let the children be alone for long periods of time. But when Michael took to tutoring the younger ones in her presence, she could see that he was doing a great job with them. Yes, she was lucky to have a son, and at the moment that was her only consolation. She walked aimlessly down the street, hardly looking around, not even noticing the beginning of the rain, small and nasty. All her thoughts were centered on one single question: how she had come to such a life. How had her happy youthful love ended when her husband openly accused her of infidelity without any reason? Kathy remembered how they had met. She is a young economics student at one of the country's leading universities. He was a promising young entrepreneur. Together they seemed to others, and to themselves, to be a perfect couple. Their relationship developed like in some romantic fairy tale. Courtship, gifts, restaurants, huge gorgeous bouquets of flowers. Both of them had a great future ahead of them, and hardly anyone could imagine the poverty and doom in which these people found themselves now. And this fall began, perhaps, at the very moment when Benjamin began to persistently persuade his future wife to leave the institute. "Why would you do that?" He said, "My income is enough for 2. You will stay at home, cook, clean, bring up children after all." At first, Kathy flatly refused to even hear about it. Raised in an orphanage, who had every chance to be at the bottom of life, she, by incredible diligence and by some miracle, managed to get into decent society. And now she clung to that opportunity with all her might. However, in the end, Benjamin managed to convince the girl that now this wonderful new world, in any case, will not go anywhere from her. And at first, everything was really good. Kathy, as Benjamin had planned, was setting up a household in the common house while he was doing his business. They had enough money, even with a surplus. Nevertheless, somehow it didn't work out. There were always some not obligatory, but pleasant things that I wanted to buy right now. And perhaps none of them at that time thought about the need for any savings. My parents would help us in case of emergency, Benjamin assured his young wife. When she timidly started talking about it, "You know they're not poor," Kathy still didn't know. He himself at that time believed what he was saying or was deceiving her, confident that that very critical situation would never happen. Anyway, after a while, something happened to his business. Kathy did not go into details and knew only that over time it began to give less and less profit until, in the end, did not finally collapse. And that's when it became clear that Benjamin's parents weren't going to help the young family in any way. "Except for you," his father told him. "We have younger children who are not yet on their feet. And you're a grown man, and you have to deal with your problems on your own." Then they had to sell the luxurious large apartment in which they lived and move to a small 2-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. Surprisingly enough, Benjamin himself was most dissatisfied with this arrangement. Apparently, it was the fact that he had spent his whole life in luxury, and now he was forced to carry a rather miserable existence. Kathy, on the other hand, was philosophically calm. She, of course, had also become accustomed to a poor life, but she had once led it, and therefore was more prepared for various difficulties and knew what to do under such conditions. Quite quickly she found a job. She got a job in a store as a saleswoman. The salary, of course, was modest, but it was still better than nothing. She didn't see any other options for herself anyway. Benjamin, on the other hand, chose a completely different way to solve his problems. He went on a long-term bender. Kathy didn't blame her husband for anything. Things happen in life. On the contrary, as a decent wife, she tried to inspire him, calm him down, and support him. And in the end, her efforts succeeded. Drinking Benjamin stopped and began to develop new ideas for business, which would allow their family to return to its former wealth and prosperity. However, with these ideas, always something did not go well, even if it was possible to save some initial amount and start a new business. Quite quickly, there were all sorts of difficulties that brought all Benjamin's efforts to naught. And the longer it went on, the more unbearable the man's character became. "I do not have enough money to fully realize my projects," he frankly told Kathy. "But what can I do, sweetheart?" she replied. "I'm already taking all the extra shifts I can. I work almost no weekends. I just don't have anywhere else to take the time to earn even more. Of course, if I'd finished college, it would have been much easier. But what's to be sorry about now? This situation should be a lesson to both of us. I need to finish my studies and find a normal job. Besides, like I said, I'll need to save up. But of course, that's just for when we get out off. How are we going to get out?" Her husband was indignant. "Well, to have more money." Shyly stammering Kathy, "You could get yourself some part-time work, even for half a day." "I don't have time for that." Benjamin was adamant. "In case you haven't noticed, while you're working for Pennies, I'm trying to rebuild the business and get us back on track, and you're not helping me at all." "But I'm really doing the best I can." Kathy replied in surprise. "No." Her husband objected with obvious irritation in his voice. "Not everything. There's something you haven't done, even though I've repeatedly explained to you how important it is to me and to you. Honey, you seem to forget that even though I didn't get a full education, I studied economics for 2 years. What you're suggesting is absolutely insane. Maybe you'll finally start trusting me on things I know something about. You just don't believe in me," in a frustrated voice. Benjamin replied, "You think that if I've made mistakes once, I'll make them all the time and I'll never make them again." After such statements, Kathy, of course, immediately rushed to convince her husband that he is deeply mistaken and no one believes in him as much as she does. Eventually, this conversation would end with nothing, only to begin again the next day. However, no matter how hard Benjamin tried, there was no way Kathy could agree to his plan. And his proposal was very simple: to take out a large loan in her name to put the money into business. He, a bankrupt, and in addition officially unemployed, no bank wanted to lend. Therefore, he could not realize his idea without the help of his wife. Kathy urged him to think about how they would pay back the loan in case of another failure. She was absolutely sure that this was not the way to restore the former status, but to an even deeper hole, and to her luck, she did not give in to any persuasion from her husband. And then she got pregnant with Michael. And Benjamin had to leave all his business ideas and get a job to be able to feed his family, which was soon to become even bigger. Of course, he was not happy about this prospect, but both spouses were still sure that this situation was temporary. Kathy did not plan to stay on maternity leave for long and was going to go to work as soon as she got her son into nursery school. But this plan was not destined to come true either. There were no places in kindergartens, and pretty soon Kathy realized that there was nothing to dream about nursery schools. Well, if the turn will come up in 3 or 4 years. And then it happened that she got pregnant again, just when she was 3 years old, and gave birth to 2 children. That's when Benjamin started to talk about her going back to work. She realized it herself. But how could she do that with 3 small children in her arms? Over time, her husband became more and more insistent, but the situation did not change, which eventually led to the ugly conflict that happened that unfortunate evening. That's what Kathy was thinking about, wandering aimlessly in the darkness of the night through the streets of the neighborhood, which for so many years had become almost dear to her. Fortunately, although it was on the outskirts of the city, it was considered quite prosperous. Any crime was extremely rare here. Therefore, it was quite safe to move even at this late hour. However, that was the last thing on the woman's mind. Suddenly her attention was drawn to something strange. Kathy, immersed in her own unhappy thoughts and memories, did not even immediately realize what had alarmed her. It was as if a neon sign had flashed somewhere in her subconscious, informing her that something in the space around her was wrong. Snapping out of her own musings, the woman looked around and rather quickly discovered the cause of her vague unease. It was a little girl, the same age as her Michael. In her smart pink dress, she was sitting on the curb all by herself, gazing at the asphalt beneath her feet. Kathy raised her eyebrows in surprise. She'd never encountered street kids in her neighborhood, not begging, not just wandering the streets, especially at a time like this. Still, decent enough people lived here to let their kids out alone at night, and at the same time far from rich enough to have beggars interested in the neighborhood. Besides, the girl didn't look like a street kid or even just a child from a dysfunctional family. She was wearing nice and clean, obviously new clothes, and she behaved quite differently from what one would expect from little vagrants. The whole situation surprised Kathy. Surprisingly, it was unimportant, a background of sorts. In her mind, she realized all these details much later, when she was once again replaying this strange encounter in her head. Right now, she was only interested in one thing: a child on the street at night, which meant she was in potential danger. She had to give this girl all the help she could. With that in mind, she approached the child carefully, so as not to frighten her, and squatted down in front of her so that their faces were on the same level. Kathy spoke softly and affably. "Hello," she said. "What's your name?" "I don't know." The girl answered surprisingly calmly. "What is it?" Kathy was surprised. "It's like this. I mean, I probably knew it once, but I forgot. And who are your parents and where are they?" I don't know. I don't remember, said the girl. Do you remember anything at all? Cautiously inquired Kathy. This time the girl didn't say anything, just shook her head silently. The woman, however, was not satisfied with this answer. But how did you get here? I came, the girl answered. From where? From there. The child waved his hand indifferently, showing the direction. And what was there? A forest or a park or something? I don't know. I woke up there and didn't remember anything. I just went somewhere. And now I was tired, so I decided to sit. Kathy shook her head perplexed. She didn't like this whole situation, and she had no idea what she should do about it. Finally, after a while of silence and thought, she asked, "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded vigorously, signaling that she hadn't eaten in a long time. Okay. Tiredly, Kathy sighed. Come with me, I'll feed you, and you'll sleep in our apartment with my children. And in the morning we'll think about what to do with you. And for convenience, I'm gonna call you Molly for now. Do you mind? No. Quite indifferently answered the new Molly. Taking the girl's hand firmly, Kathy headed for home. All her own troubles and sorrows immediately went out of her mind. That was just the way she was. If someone needed help, her own problems moved to the back of her mind. Especially unbearable for her as a mother was this situation with a neglected child who couldn't even remember his own name. When they reached the apartment without any accidents, it was already about 2 o'clock. All of Kathy's housemates, as she was immediately convinced, were sleeping peacefully in their beds. The woman was pricked by a vague resentment. None of them seemed to care where she was at this late hour. On the other hand, this state of affairs could not please her. Explaining to her children and her husband, especially her husband, where this girl had come from and why she was in their apartment, Kathy had no desire to do so. She quietly went to the kitchen, took out the remains of a modest dinner from the refrigerator, and fed the little waif. Once full, the girl began to yawn desperately. It was clear that Molly not only had not eaten for a long time, but also had not slept for a long time. Kathy decided to make a bed for her on the couch and settled down on the floor. Monstrously tired for the day, she fell asleep very quickly, forgetting to even set her alarm clock. As a rule, she got up before everyone else in the house. After all, she had to make breakfast, her husband had to get ready for work, and her oldest son had to go to school. Besides, she was the only one in the family who was a lark, and early rising for her was not only habitual, but also pleasant. But of course, that didn't extend to when she had to go to bed late under those circumstances. Waking up without an alarm clock proved to be extremely difficult. Naturally, Kathy overslept, and her awakening was not the most pleasant, for she awoke to someone shaking her roughly by the shoulder. When she opened her eyes, she saw Benjamin's angry face right in front of her. "I'm late for work," he exclaimed, noticing that his wife had opened her eyes. "Breakfast is not ready. You're still asleep, not in bed, but on the kitchen floor. And explain to me, please, who is that girl sleeping on the couch?" At first, Kathy didn't even realize which girl he was talking about. Then she remembered her night's adventures and tried to explain to Benjamin what was going on. He listened with a skeptical expression on his face. Then he said that Molly would be gone when he got home from work. Without breakfast, he left for work, leaving Kathy to come to her senses. However, even this luxury was beyond her reach. After only a few minutes, the woman realized that her husband probably hadn't bothered to simply wake Michael up, let alone getting him ready for school. And sure enough, the child was sleeping peacefully in his crib. If Benjamin was already late for work, It was time for Michael to leave the house. For the first time that morning, Kathy looked at her watch and clutched her head. Her son's first class was due to start in 10 minutes. Waking Michael up, she quickly made him a light breakfast and sent him off to class. It wasn't a long walk to school, and the boy could manage it on his own. However, Kathy realized that he would still be late, and that meant that he, and therefore she, would soon be in trouble. However, Kathy wasn't going to think about that right now, as she had other difficulties that required some immediate action. Fortunately, all the hurry that had taken place in the house during the previous half hour had not disturbed Molly's sound sleep. Her rescuer decided to wait until the girl woke up herself, and in the meantime to take care of her own small children and think about what she should do. The girl did not get up until 2 o'clock, and by this time Kathy had already developed a clear plan of action. It was just about time for a walk with the kids, and she decided, taking Molly with her, to stop by the nearest police station. After all, that's what law enforcement is for, to deal with cases like this. "So you found this girl on the street last night?" The officer on duty at the station asked her. "That's right. And she can't even remember her name?" "That's correct." Kathy confirmed it again. She didn't understand the point of this procedure. The woman had already told the whole story once. Then she told it again in a written statement. And now, reading her statement, the police officer for some reason again asked about literally all the circumstances that she had already repeatedly disclosed. "Why didn't you go to the police right away?" "You see, I was very tired, and it just didn't occur to me that it was necessary to do exactly that." "I see," sighed the duty officer. Molly turned out not to realize that it was about her. Or she did, but she didn't pay much attention to it. Instead, she looked at the room they were in with interest. Although in Kathy's opinion, there was nothing fascinating or even beautiful about it, nor could there be. "And what do you plan to do with the child?" The policeman asked after a moment's silence. "What do you mean?" Kathy was surprised. The question had shocked her before it had been asked. The woman sincerely believed that now the girl's fate was the responsibility of the law enforcers. Directly, the duty officer replied indifferently, "We can put her in a special institution, or she can stay with you for now." Kathy's eyes darkened. The choice she was being offered was impossible. On the one hand, her husband had made it quite clear that she would not be here by this evening. On the other hand, her husband had made it quite clear that she wouldn't be here by tonight. And she realized that they couldn't afford another child. They could barely manage their own. All this was understandable and logical. But the other side of the coin was in the words, a special institution and orphanage. It was unthinkable to let this girl go there. Kathy remembered very well, despite the years that had passed, how difficult it had been for her to live and grow up in the orphanage, how she had had to endure the bullying of other children and the cruel punishments of the educators. For her, it was all in the past. She endured and overcame everything. But she was born into a dysfunctional family and lost even the parents she had. She was used to hardship since she was a child. For her, this kind of treatment was the order of the day. Molly, on the other hand, was a completely different matter. It was immediately clear that she was a homely, beloved, maybe even a little spoiled child with obvious mental trauma, since she couldn't remember her past or even her real name. Kathy was absolutely obvious that this girl simply would not survive in the harsh conditions of the orphanage. Of course, at that moment, the woman had no time to go through all these long and tedious thoughts in her head. But they were undoubtedly what motivated her decision. Looking into the eyes of the duty officer, she answered firmly, "The girl will stay with us." That was the policeman's perfect answer. He was obviously expecting such an answer, and when he received it, he suddenly opened up. I'm an orphan myself. I can see that this girl doesn't belong in an institution like this. That's what I thought. Quite coldly, Kathy replied. As a matter of fact, he went on, not noticing her tone, it's not exactly in the rules to leave her with you. But I'll try to straighten it out. Good, the woman replied. Can we go now? Yes, of course. If we hear anything about the little girl's relatives, we'll call you. But to tell you the truth, I'd advise you to start looking on your own. You know, sometimes the internet can do more than the police. When Kathy finally got home, she found a distraught Michael there. He had already returned from school and dejectedly showed his mother his diary, which contained a note about his tardiness and the fact that the class teacher had called her in. I'm sorry, Mom. Guiltily, the son said. I should have gotten up myself in the morning. No, you didn't, Kathy replied. You know it's my job to wake everyone up in the morning, not because it's my job or anything like that, but because that's what we agreed. So I'm the one who should be apologizing to you. From their conversation, it would seem that no other girl was present in the apartment. Michael, though he squinted at her with some bewilderment, tactfully did not ask any questions. Kathy once again thought about how lucky she was to have a son who, unlike many, even the twins, had been a trouble-free child in his early childhood. Leaving the younger children in the care of the older ones, Kathy set about preparing dinner. Then everyone sat down at the table, much to the woman's surprise. Michael and Molly had somehow managed to become friends and were chatting animatedly about something of their own. And only after the meal, when the girl was not around, her son approached her with an obvious question. Mom, is Molly going to live with us now? I asked her, but she doesn't know yet. Yes, son. Kathy replied, the girl is lost and she needs help. If we don't take her in, she'll go to an orphanage. It's a good thing she's staying. Unexpectedly, Michael concluded. Why? Mom was surprised. The younger ones like her. Her son told her earnestly, so it'll be easier for you and me now. Patting his hair, Kathy laughed and went about her usual chores, laundry, cleaning, preparing dinner for her husband. She preferred not to think about what would happen when he returned from work. However, the scandal exceeded all her expectations. What the hell is this? Almost shouting, he was pacing the kitchen. Do not you have enough of your own? You picked up some other mongrel. She's not a mongrel. She was sticking up for Kathy. Besides, it's only temporary until her parents are found. We can't let her end up in a foster home. I mean, look at her. She's a total home child. There's no reason for her to be there. There's a special institution for people like her. And she has no business being here. Have you given it any thought? Our charity worker. How are we going to feed her, clothe her? And all the other expenses associated with keeping a child. What do you know about child-related expenses? Unexpectedly, even to herself, Kathy burst into flames. Have you ever bought anything for them? Do you have any idea what a child's needs are? She didn't know what had prompted her to begin this accusatory speech. Perhaps it was just a resentment that had built up in her soul over the years, and now she needed a place to vent it. Her husband listened to her angry confession, unusually quiet, without interrupting or objecting. He must not have expected such pressure from his wife, usually affectionate, calm, even in conflict situations. And Kathy kept talking and talking, saying everything that had accumulated in her soul, and that the money that he earns, categorically not enough to live on, and that it could have been avoided if he had gotten a job right away instead of sitting on her neck for several years. She even reminded him of the various excesses that he allowed himself after the birth of their children, while she herself had to count the pennies that he gave her to somehow feed and clothe the whole family. She talked, of course, not only about money, also about how their relationship had deteriorated, how she lacked the former love and romance, not only and not so much flowers and gifts, of course not. She would like some simple human attention, and at least a little warmth and participation, instead of constant unfair reproaches. Well, in a perfectly calm tone, Benjamin said, when Kathy had finally finished her monologue, "I take it you're all much better off without me than with me." The ominous phrase hung in the air, and the man, without another word, took a large suitcase out of the closet in the room and began to pack his belongings into it. Kathy, it would seem, should have, seeing this, started crying, apologizing, telling her husband how much she loved him. Persuade him not to make any hasty decisions, and only some 2 days ago she would have done just that. But now she looked on with the equanimity that had ruined her. Benjamin was assembling at an emphatically leisurely pace and glanced occasionally at Kathy. Obviously, he expected the usual reaction from her too, and probably more intent on scaring the woman than actually going. If so, his plan didn't work, and once the suitcase was fully packed, there was nowhere to retreat to. "To hell with you," he threw angrily to his wife and slammed the front door behind him. Kathy stood in the middle of the kitchen for a few more minutes, then waved goodbye and went into the nursery. There Molly and Michael did their best to calm the younger children, obviously frightened by the ugly scene in the kitchen. The older ones were as pale as chalk, but feeling responsible, they tried not to panic. The woman hugged all 4 of them tightly. "Is Daddy not coming back?" Michael finally asked. Kathy noted that there was not an ounce of regret or joy in his voice. In fact, he didn't really care whether Daddy came back or not. He was just clarifying the information. Of course he did. The man who rarely came home, even on weekends, was almost a stranger to the children. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Maybe he'll come back in a while." So they became a family of 5, 4 children, and Kathy herself. If at first she had feared that without her husband's help she would not be able to support such a horde of hungry mouths, she soon discovered that this was not the case. On the contrary, without constant scandals and ridiculous demands to live much easier and calmer. This was despite the fact that there was no money for household expenses. Benjamin allocated from his salary some very tiny amount, while the bulk of them Kathy paid from her maternity pay. It was getting close to the time when the former were due to expire, and that was a bit of a problem. Kathy realized there was no way she could go full-time with 4 young children. But suddenly, with Benjamin gone, she had the energy and time to slowly start looking for part-time options. And that's where a few happy accidents helped her. First, she got a call from the principal of a kindergarten, the enrollment line in which her children were waiting. Without saying anything specific on the phone, she persuasively asked Kathy as soon as possible to come to the institution for a personal conversation. "Hello," she began the meeting. "I understand that you have been waiting for a long time for your children to be able to enroll in our daycare center. So long that one of them has already managed to go to school." Kathy replied somewhat irritably. "I'll tell you a secret," the principal remarked. "By the time it's your turn, the younger ones will have already gone to school. Many are left without a garden. Unfortunately, we have many more children than places. And don't look at me like that. I didn't come up with this, and it's not in my power to change it. Why did you call me? Just to tell me we don't stand a chance. On the contrary, I called you here to offer you a solution to this problem. You see, the nursery nurse quit a while ago. No one stays long, you know, and there's no way to find a new one. The remaining staff are knocked down and are also about to run away. So I thought I should offer this vacancy to someone who has been waiting for a long time. I'll be honest, it's a lot of work and the pay is low. But we can get your kids into an age-appropriate group right away. And why are you suggesting this to me? Kathy asked suspiciously. I don't even have a teaching degree. Surely there are more suitable candidates, but you have 3 children of your own. Believe me, in the job you have to do, that's more important. However, I will not hide more suitable candidates. As you put it, we also made such an offer, but none of them accepted it. So we made a list of those who might be interested in such a deal, and you were not the first one I called. Is that answer satisfactory? Kathy was fine with that. Now she had some work, which could be perfectly combined with taking care of the younger children. The older ones were already independent enough to spend a few hours in the apartment without her and to heat their own lunch. Moreover, the kindergarten was not far from their school and home. Of course, they were not living very well, but not worse than before Benjamin left. Life was beginning to get better, and after a while, a second good thing happened. This time, Kathy was called in by the same police officer on duty who had taken her statement about finding Molly in the street a few weeks ago. Any news about her parents? Kathy asked hopefully. Alas, none, the policeman replied. Like I told you, we're not very good at this sort of thing, especially since the data set on her is minimal. Have you tried looking for her yourself? I didn't have time for that, the woman shrugged. I have 3 of my own besides her, you know. And recently my husband left. I see. The policeman sighed. But in general, I called you on a very specific case. You see, I've finally managed to formalize Molly's stay with you. That means that now you can put her in school and everything. That's great, Kathy replied. The fact that Molly couldn't go to school was really stressing the woman out. For now, she was tutoring her on her own. But she realized that this issue would have to be resolved no later than the beginning of the next school year. And already summer was fast approaching. And that meant that the problem would soon become acute. Yes, besides, you become the girl's legal guardian. That, of course, comes with certain benefits. Plus, I understand you'll qualify for certain benefits as a mother of many children. It worked out exactly as he said. Of course, there was never enough money for anything. But now, at least Kathy could be sure that the children would be clothed, fed, and enrolled in school. Contrary to her fears, life without Benjamin had not collapsed not only financially, but emotionally as well. No matter how hard she tried, she still could not experience any feelings about his departure. Something must have burned out in her the very moment her husband recklessly accused her of non-existent infidelity. Such a reaction was very surprising to Kathy herself. But for all that, it couldn't help but make her happy. With 4 children in her arms, it would be bad timing, the misery of a collapsed love. On the other hand, perhaps the children were precisely what contributed to her peace of mind. With all the cares, she had no time to indulge in sadness and despair. And so 2 more years passed. For the convenience of all family members, it was decided to conditionally divide the apartment into 2 halves, a male and a female. Molly and the younger Jenna moved into Kathy's room, where the adults used to live. Michael and his brother Mason stayed in his room. It was cramped, of course, but so far it hadn't caused any particular problems. Molly and Michael's friendship was growing stronger every day. They now went to the same school. True, the girl was a grade younger. The boy treated her like another little sister and patronized her in every possible way. With the younger children, she also had a great relationship. In short, despite her unexpected appearance, She fit perfectly into the family. Kathy herself loved the girl as her own daughter and sometimes even forgot that this is not true. Molly, in turn, quite quickly got used to calling the woman Mom and her children brothers and sisters. The day on which the girl was discovered amicably decided to consider her birthday. Kathy, it seemed quite symbolic. After all, who knows what might have happened to Molly if she hadn't caught her eye in time? In a way, it could be said that it was Benjamin's horrible scene that night that had saved the little girl from a much sadder fate. And although Kathy was glad that Molly was now her daughter, she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Was there no one looking for the girl? On the advice of a policeman, she repeatedly advertised for the found child, and all to no avail. The police also did not succeed in finding her parents. The fact that the girl had never regained her real memories added to the worry. It seemed that until the moment she woke up in the park, she simply did not exist in this world, which of course could not be true. And Kathy would very much like to know how things really were. But the various doctors at the budgetary polyclinic only waved their hands. They had never dealt with such severe cases and had no idea what to do in such a situation. The only thing that one of them could do was to give the contacts of a good private clinic, specializing in helping children who have lost their memory. But the family, of course, had no money for this. Molly herself, the lack of memories of the past, it seemed, did not bother in the slightest. She childishly naive lived today and knew only that in this day it is good for her. And what was there before all this was not so important. Kathy couldn't understand that either, and even envied her adopted daughter in some way. She herself at her age wanted to know who her parents were and why they were no longer with her. And in the end, she had so driven the teacher with her questions that she had answered her honestly and directly. Alcoholics, they were back alley, she said through her teeth. Unnecessary and useless, like you yourself. Then they died, and you fell on our heads. You got what you wanted. Are you happy? Now go scrub the toilets. It's your turn. Remembering this episode, Kathy sometimes thought that maybe it was a good thing that Molly had no interest in her past. On the other hand, when the woman found her, she didn't look at all like a kid who'd had a lot of bad luck in this life. Quite the opposite. And it often occurred to her that it might have been much more comfortable and pleasant for the girl to live with her own family than with them. However, one way or another, Kathy could not change anything in this situation, although she made every effort to do so. And in the end, she resigned herself to the idea that they would never know the whole truth. And perhaps it was at that moment that she finally decided that the girl was not just temporarily living with her, but was a full-fledged member of her family. And then the question arose. That is not just to be her guardian and fully adopt the child. And here she faced a funny and at the same time sad legal subtlety. Still in an official marriage, she could not do it without her husband's consent. That meant only one thing: she had to get a divorce. With a heavy heart, Kathy dialed Benjamin's number. She didn't want to talk to the man, and she would have been much more willing to do it through the courts. But such a process would take much longer, and the woman hoped that her husband, with whom she had had no contact whatsoever for 2 years, would simply agree to peacefully file a complaint and go their separate ways, not just virtually, but officially. Kathy, she heard Benjamin's affectionate voice in the receiver. "I'm so glad you finally called me. You have no idea how much I've missed you." Kathy was taken aback. On the one hand, something painful, yet sweet, pricked her heart. It was exactly the tone he'd spoken to her in before, even before all the horror that had happened to them. And for a moment, it was like she was back in those happy times. For another, it sounded extreme, inappropriate now. "I know you miss me too, and you'll make the right decision in the end. Benjamin continued inspiringly, "You can't just leave your husband because of some street girl. You're calling to tell me that this problem has been resolved and I can come back, aren't you?" All the happy memories are gone. With the last phrase, her husband vividly reminded Kathy of the reason why, when he left, she was not even very upset about it, and she answered in the coldest possible tone, "Benjamin, I'm calling to ask you for a divorce. So you got yourself a new man." His voice immediately lost all its affection. "That was fast, I'll give you that. I have not found anyone, and in general, it is none of your business exactly since you left me alone with 4 children in my arms. Like you said, we got along just fine without you. And now I'd like to settle this last technicality. I did not leave you." The husband said indignantly, "I just couldn't stay in the same apartment with that girl, and I wasn't in a position to carry another child, so I got out of your life until you solved this problem." "Believe me, I've solved all my problems except the one I'm calling you about. Let's end this useless conversation. Benjamin, I don't need you or my kids anymore." "Oh well," now there was real rage in his voice. "In that case, sue me. I won't give you a divorce, but I suggest you think twice before you do it. And for example, remember that the apartment you and I bought in marriage, it's a jointly acquired property. And now I have to live with my parents, who aren't too keen on having me here. Do you see where I'm going with this?" And with those words, he hung up. Kathy could not believe what she had heard. Would he really not give her a divorce? In fact, he threatened to take away her and the children's only corner of the house if she did. Could it really be true? That romantic, loving young man she'd once married, but she had nowhere to retreat. After a few more attempts to peacefully negotiate with her husband, she realized it was all useless. Either she gets rid of Molly and Benjamin comes home, or divorce through the court with division of the apartment. He wouldn't hear of any other options. "I realize you still need time to come to your senses," he said in one of those conversations, "and I'm not in any hurry to make a decision. But since you deign to talk to me, keep in mind that I'm waiting for it, for your decision. And even my patience isn't unlimited." Kathy herself didn't want to drag this whole thing out, maintaining a status of sorts. It was clear that it was impossible to hang this issue indefinitely. It was necessary to solve it right now. After all, Molly's formal adoption was also a kind of formality. Like this divorce, it was true. But what if, for example, she wants to remarry? In the end, Kathy made up her mind after all and applied to the court. Before doing so, she did one thing. She tried to explain to the children in terms they could understand that their living conditions could soon become even worse than they were before, and at least for a while they would all have to live in a one-room apartment. To her surprise and delight, everyone was sympathetic to the decision. Benjamin kept his word and really tried to sue for the part of the apartment that belonged to him. However, unexpectedly, the court rejected his claim. The judge cited the fact that all their children live in the apartment with their mother. In addition, there is also the only place of residence of another child. Therefore, it is impossible to divide the apartment in any way, unless if part of the children's hapless father will take to his upbringing. There was an ominous silence in the hall. The children were too young to have their opinions and desires taken into account by the court. Consequently, at this point, everything depended on Benjamin's answer. For a few minutes, he looked triumphantly at his former wife. She understood that he didn't want children, but for the sake of jangling his nerves, he might agree to the proposal, and then they will face many months of new trials, fighting for the children, which of course he will lose. But all of this will take away Kathy's time and money, not to mention 1 million nerve cells. However, the husband apparently decided that he did not need these problems at all either. so he agreed to let the children stay with their mother. But in this case, he is entitled to compensation in the amount of the market value of his half of the apartment. The court agreed. However, taking into account Kathy's small income and the number of her dependents, she had to pay this money in small amounts over many years. Not that this decision satisfied either side. Nevertheless, it was the only possible compromise. In Kathy's family, this state of affairs was considered an absolute victory. The children, however she had prepared them, appeared terrified of the legal process, especially the prospect of being separated and forced to live with a father the younger ones didn't even remember. And now that it was all behind them, the boys were jubilant. Besides, being a completely free woman and Molly's longtime guardian, Kathy, though not without difficulty, was able to get the girl officially adopted. This was the occasion for a big celebration by their standards. Inexpensive but tasty cake from the store and a trip to the amusement park were to be its indispensable attributes. None of the Kathy children had ever been to such a place in their lives, but of course, each of them dreamed of going there at least once. For 3 months, the woman cut all the expenses she could just to save up money for this trip and arrange a real entertainment for her children. And now the big day has come. The children looked around with interest, trying to choose which of the various entertainments they would like to experience. Of course, trying everything at once was out of the question. And fortunately, even the little ones were well aware of these limitations. Only Molly, the usual, noisy and cheerful one, behaved in a peculiarly quiet way. She was looking around with a strange expression on her face, as if she was wondering why she was in this place. But it was a very different kind of wonder from everyone else's. Molly paid very little attention to the rides themselves. They seemed very familiar to her. "Molly, are you all right?" Kathy asked her, concerned about the girl's atypical behavior. "Yes, I'm fine," Molly replied, her voice quiet and colorless. This startled the woman even more. The intonation of the child was radically at odds with the meaning of her words, which was completely out of character for Molly. Open and trusting. She was not used to hiding her emotions, so her attempt to do so was a complete failure, and it alarmed her foster mother even more. However, Kathy did not continue this dialogue. She realized that if Molly had any reason to try to hide her feelings, then no matter how much she questioned, she would only succeed in making the girl even more withdrawn. Otherwise, there's a good chance she'll want to share her feelings. And so it happened. Kathy's own children were completely mesmerized by their surroundings. Unaware of their surroundings, they argued passionately about which attraction to try first. Finally, they came to a common decision and went on the Ferris wheel. Molly unexpectedly refused to go with them, citing fear of heights. No one tried to talk her out of it. She and Kathy sat down on a bench, from which they had a good view of the wheel's cabin, in which the others sat, all the way to the Ferris wheel. An awkward silence reigned for a while. Then the girl interrupted it with a phrase that her foster parent least expected to hear. "Mom, you just don't get angry with me." She started and stopped halfway through, trying to see Kathy's reaction in her eyes. "Have I ever been angry with you?" Kathy replied in surprise. "No," Molly said, embarrassed. "But you can now." "Why, sunshine?" "What's wrong? You see, ever since we came to this park, I feel like I know it. Like I've been here before. Maybe you have. It's not like I've." She shut down again. Kathy felt a sense of joyous anticipation. Could it be that memories were beginning to return to the girl? Could it be that her real parents had actually taken her to this particular park, or just a similar one? And now the surroundings are helping her regain her memory. Why should I be angry about this? What, if anything, if I remember everything in my childhood and those other parents? So what's wrong with that? Because then we'd know exactly what happened to you. Maybe we could even find those people and tell them that you're okay. But then they'd probably want to take me away," Molly exclaimed, almost terrified. "It won't be that easy." Kathy tried to reassure her. "You'll be 9 years old soon, maybe more." "We don't even know that for sure. You've seen for yourself recently that a trial isn't a quick process. There's no way around it. Once you're 10, you can decide what kind of family you want to live with. And then maybe you'll like your birth parents better than me." "No way." "Pouty lips, Molly. How could you possibly know that?" "They abandoned me." With childish categorization, the girl retorted. "Maybe not abandoned, but just lost and still cannot find. Anyway, I'm used to you, and to my brothers, and to my sister. I've been trying hard not to remember anything for a long time now, so that—" Molly couldn't find the right words. Kathy understood her perfectly well enough not to be faced with this impossible choice. After all, she probably loved her real parents too, and if she remembered them, the feelings might return. But her new family was already practically her own. "Listen," as gently as possible, Kathy said. "You may think there are only 2 options, but there are many more. If we happen to find your real parents, you don't have to say goodbye to us forever. You can visit us, play with your brothers and sister, and do it quite often. I'm sure whoever these people are, they love you. And once they realize it's better for you, they won't stop you from doing it." Molly rounded her eyes. It seemed that such an option did not occur to her at all, but now her thoughts flowed in that direction, and the girl calmed down a little, realizing that everything is not as hopeless as she imagined it. Unfortunately, Kathy could not say the same about herself. She was not at all sure of the justice of her own soothing words. It is not known how long the conversation would have continued, or where it would have led in the end, had it not been interrupted, rather unceremoniously. A man dressed in the uniform of an amusement park employee approached them. He had a broom in his hands and did not look the most welcoming. Nevertheless, when he spoke, his words sounded polite and without any aggression. "Hello. I'd apologize, but your daughter looked very familiar. Isn't that Lisa by any chance?" When she heard that name, the girl perked up. From the outside, she was like a lost dog who in a casual conversation of strangers heard her name. She began to stare intently at the janitor, as if remembering whether she had not met him before. "You see, what's the matter?" Carefully choosing her words, Kathy replied, "We don't know for sure, and we can't rule out that it is her. The fact is that this girl was found about 3 years ago, quite far from this place. She was wandering around in the street at a very unchildlike time and remembered absolutely nothing of her past, and unfortunately still doesn't to this day. If you really know her, 3 years ago," stunned, exclaimed the janitor. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's when I and anyone else last saw the girl I'm talking about. Of course, she looked much younger then, but the resemblance is uncanny. Tell me everything from the beginning," Kathy suggested. While the janitor sighed and collected his thoughts, the children on the Ferris wheel returned. Michael, however, realized from the look on their mother's face that something serious was going on and that it was not worth interfering with the conversation. He diverted the attention of the younger ones to something and then gently led them to the new attraction. They used to come here a lot, you see. The girl's family, father, mother, and little girl. The janitor began at last. They used to come here almost every week, and then they disappeared. But I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe they found another park they liked better. or something. That's when the amusement arcades started sprouting up all over the city like mushrooms after a rainstorm. And then what? Molly asked, listening to him as if mesmerized. And then I saw an ad in the paper that the girl was missing. The parents offered a lot of money for any information about her whereabouts, but as I understand it, they never found her. Do you have, I don't know, a copy of that paper? With a mixture of fear and hope, Kathy asked. There's no newspaper left. The janitor replied, but if you are interested in the contacts of these people, I kept them just in case. What if I see or hear something? Digging a little in his pocket, he took out an old push-button phone, found the right number, and dictated it to Kathy. Wouldn't it be nice if you were Lisa? He said one last thing to Molly. Her parents, as far as I could see, were very fond of her. Both Molly and Kathy returned home in a strangely agitated state. Perhaps the solution to the mystery that had plagued them, both for 3 years now, was right in their hands. But neither of them knew where its discovery would lead. The shrewd Michael, of course, noticed that something was amiss, but he didn't ask any questions. On the contrary, he carefully diverted the attention of Jenna and Mason so that they wouldn't pester him. Kathy spent several days in a row with the phone in her hands, dialing the cherished number, then quickly resetting it before the call could go through. It wasn't even that she was afraid of what she might find out. It was just that she had no idea how to start this difficult conversation. But at some point, gathering her strength, she did take that decisive step into the unknown. Hello, what can I do for you? After a few beeps, a pleasant male voice answered her. Hello, said Kathy. Then she exhaled sharply and continued. My name is Kathy. I'm calling about your daughter who went missing about 3 years ago. What? The polite, neutrally friendly tone of the caller changed immediately. The man was obviously stunned by what he was hearing and had no idea how to react. Whether to rejoice, whether to be indignant, whether to be frightened. What information could this strange woman be telling him? You know what this is about. There is some possibility that she has been in my care all this time and was recently adopted by me. I can't say for sure, as the girl had lost her memory for some reason and had no idea of her relatives. I don't want to get your hopes up, but a few days ago, she seemed to be recognized by the janitor at the amusement park. I think you and I should meet and talk things over. The man replied gruffly. You're right, but I'd prefer the first meeting to take place without the girl. Why bother her and you unnecessarily? I agree, he replied. Only a few hours had passed when Kathy, terribly worried, walked into one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. A man was already waiting for her at the indicated table. Perhaps he was about 10 years older than she was, which did not diminish his beauty. Even in such an environment, the woman could not help noting that he looked just great. Hello again, she said, taking a seat across from him. He nodded silently. Either he didn't want to say anything, or he just couldn't. Without saying a word, he took out a folder from his business briefcase and put it on the table and carefully moved it to his interlocutor. She, in turn, handed him some simple film photographs of Molly. Opening the folder, Kathy found that the stranger had the same thing on his mind as she had. He had brought several pictures of his daughter, apparently taken shortly before her disappearance at the very same amusement park. In one of the pictures, she posed in the pink dress she had been wearing the night the woman had found her on the street. There could be no doubt. Molly was the one in the image. Kathy had no pictures of the girl from the same period, only the most recent pictures, taken on a recently acquired cheap camera, bought out of hand on one of the classified sites. Despite this, the man apparently recognized his daughter unmistakably. "It's Lisa," he whispered. "My God, she's alive, and as far as I know, perfectly healthy, except for the memory loss. I'm afraid it's true that I had no way of providing the standard of living to which she was accustomed, but the alternative was an orphanage, and I felt that even my modest 2-room apartment on the outskirts was better than that." The man fell into silence again. Kathy did not hurry him. She understood roughly what kind of storm was going on in this man's soul. At last it subsided a little, and he was able to put words into sentences. The first thing he said came out of the blue. "I never introduced myself. I'm Charles. Nice to meet you." Kathy replied in a casual way. "Yeah," he hesitated. "I'm sorry. I'm in a bit of a state of shock right now. But anyway, I have to thank you for taking my little girl in. I've been trying to find her parents for quite some time, but apparently they've separated from you somehow." Cautiously she began. "You, I understand, mostly gave ads in newspapers, and I placed them on the internet." "I didn't even think about the internet," Charles sighed. "And no one told me. Although I've always been told I'm too old-fashioned, especially for my age. Did you report it to the police?" "I did, of course." He sighed, "but they couldn't find anything." "That's strange, because the first thing I did was go to the police. I was told by a police officer at the time that there was nothing they could do." "Really? I didn't know her name, and I guess they needed to check through their channels. Speaking of which," Charles darkened visibly, "did you say she'd lost her memory?" "Unfortunately, yes. I took her to the doctors, and there was nothing they could do. It's true that when we were in that very park, it was as if she began to vaguely recognize the place. Maybe if she sees you, it'll trigger the rest of her memories. I'd like to believe that." Charles said with another heavy sigh, "Only, you see, there's another problem." "What do you mean?" "You see, the girl has lived in our family like a family member. She became very attached to me, and perhaps more importantly, to my children. And I will, pardon my harshness, insist that they continue to communicate. Unless, of course, you intend to take her in. You're not rich, are you?" Charles suddenly clarified. "I'm not ashamed of it, and I can assure you that Molly, excuse me, Lisa, gets everything she needs to live." "Yeah, that's not what I'm getting at," he said. "It's just that I think I have an offer for you that will satisfy all parties. Unless, of course, you value your job too much." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Well, you see, I'm a single busy man, and I'm not sure I can devote the time I need to my child. You see, after everything that's happened, I've been very busy. I have a big mansion in the suburbs. Why don't you move in with the kids? You'll be a live-in nanny. Don't worry about school. You can send your kids there with your own driver. By the way, there's an upscale institution just down the street. I think we can place not only Lisa, but her new siblings as well. I thought you said you had several siblings." 3. Kathy confirmed it, "and 2 of them are due to start school this year. So you're in." "It's a very tempting offer." Kathy replied thoughtfully. "There's just one thing I don't understand. That janitor in the parks said that you always came there in threes. Where is your wife?" Charles lowered his eyes to the table, but Kathy saw tears glisten treacherously in them. Only now did she realize how stupid and tactless her question had been. They had lost a child. Perhaps they had thought the girl was dead. There was no telling what could happen to a mother under such circumstances. "You see," said Charles, quite quickly getting over his emotions, "Lisa was a late baby, a very long-awaited and beloved child. My wife and I wanted a big family, but it didn't work out for a long time. And then finally, our daughter came along. The doctors said that the second birth the body simply could not withstand, and then our only daughter disappeared, and now she's found. Ah, my poor wife was only a few months away from that moment. She got sick right after Lisa went missing, and now she's gone. I'm sorry." Kathy said quietly, "I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded and took a sip of water from the glass in front of him. They sat in awkward silence for a few long minutes, and then, wanting to change the subject to something less painful, they began to discuss the details of the move and Molly and Lisa's meeting with her birth father. As a result, Kathy returned home with a clear plan of action. Her own children took the move to the huge mansion as a magical adventure. Even Michael, always reserved and serious, was almost jumping for joy. Molly alone showed no signs of happiness. She still didn't remember her father, and she was afraid to meet him. She was also visibly upset by the news of her mother's death. "Now, I don't remember her," she said, Kathy, "and I'm not even sad. But if I did, I'd probably be very sad. That's why I chose to tell you now, so you'd be ready when you remember." The woman answered her. It took another 2 weeks before the family was completely ready to move. And then finally, the day came when Molly Lisa was to meet her birth daddy. All the participants and witnesses of this event, except for little Jenna and Mason, were terribly worried. Even Michael was visibly worried about his sister. Charles organized the transportation of things, and for the family sent his personal driver. All along the way, the girl was on pins and needles, fidgeting, bouncing, and unable to concentrate on anything. However, when they drove out of town, she suddenly froze, looking out the window, as if recognizing the scenery flying outside. As soon as the car pulled up to the mansion, she shrieked loudly. Charles was no less worried than his daughter, waiting for them right on the doorstep. The girl got out of the car and froze, looking either at him or at the house. Her father started to move forward, but stopped and eventually stayed where he was, shifting nervously from foot to foot. She walked up to him and said in a half-questioning tone, "Daddy?" "Lisa, daughter, do you remember me?" It was evident that he was restraining his desire to hug the child so as not to frighten her. After all, he was well aware that he was probably nothing more than a strange uncle to her now. Even though she had been informed that he was her father, she probably didn't remember or feel it. "Vague," said the girl. "It's like I'm remembering something, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just making it up in general." "Yeah," and unable to withstand the heat of emotion, she cried. Kathy and Michael ran up to her and wrapped her in a big hug. "It's okay," said her foster mother. "It's okay, daughter. Give yourself time. You'll remember everything. Let's not rush things." The last phrase was addressed to Charles. He, however, did not think to take any action, realizing what a difficult situation they all were in. He turned abruptly and walked into the house, gesturing for the new residents to follow him. The family had already been living in the mansion for a month, and the girl's memory didn't even think of recovering. From time to time, she seemed to recall some fragments, but she could not understand whether it was true or a figment of her imagination. Finally, Charles and Kathy decided that it was time to seek professional help. By some miracle, the woman found a business card from a private clinic that had once been left for her by one of the doctors at the city hospital. Charles could afford to pay for the services of its specialists, and Molly Lisa began to visit this institution regularly. "Don't expect immediate results," one of the doctors warned them. "It can take many months or even years to regain your memory, especially if it was lost as a result of a traumatic memory." "Do you think she suffered some kind of trauma?" Charles asked worriedly. "I mean psychological trauma," the doctor explained. No physical injuries were found in our examination, but the very fact that she was lost could be what blocked her memory, especially if she had time to decide she was never coming home again. A defense mechanism of sorts, if you will, and now we have to convince her brain that it doesn't need it anymore. That night, after putting the children to bed, Kathy knocked on Charles' room. He was sitting at his desk writing something in a thick notebook. "Do you need something?" he asked politely. "Charles, I've been meaning to ask you something, but I've been hesitating. Can you tell me how Lisa disappeared? Call her by her usual name if you like. She doesn't respond to Lisa anyway, and it's not certain that she ever will. As for the circumstances of her disappearance, I don't really know much about it. My wife and I put her to bed that evening, and in the morning she was gone. We searched the house and the neighborhood, but found nothing. There were no security cameras either at our place or on the road, but we didn't find any sign of intruders in the house. It's as if she left of her own accord, but she had no reason, as far as I can see, to do so." "Not to my knowledge, no," Charles answered. 6 months of treatment at the clinic have passed, and it has finally yielded its first results, and most happily for the girl's father. She finally remembered him. It came to light in the early morning when a pleased Molly Lisa ran down the stairs to the living room where Charles was having breakfast and embraced him in her arms. This, of course, in no way canceled her love and affection for her new family as well. It was only now that she was truly happy that they all lived in one spacious house. From then on, she began to answer to both her names. And when it was time for her to get a passport, she insisted that they both be registered there. From that day on, her memory gradually returned to her. The girl recalled some episodes from her childhood, the mother of the neighbor children with whom she liked to play. By the time she was 14, she remembered literally everything but one thing: what exactly had happened the day she'd gone missing, and how she'd managed to end up on the other side of town. It wasn't until another 2 years later that those memories began to come back to her as well. Not at once very smoothly, at first in the form of some vague images that came mostly in dreams. But gradually they became clearer and clearer until, finally, not formed into one coherent picture. And it was then that Molly Lisa finally managed to tell everything to her parents. The solution was ridiculously simple and trivial. "I went to get the cat," she said. "What kitty?" Kathy was surprised. "A beautiful white one. He was walking in our yard, and I couldn't sleep, so I watched him from the window. And then he left the yard, and I wondered where he was going. So I climbed out the window. My room was on the first floor. I followed him. I thought it wouldn't be far. I'd just take one look. I came out of the courtyard, and he was gone. I went one way. I tried to look the other, but he was nowhere to be found. He must have run off somewhere to do his cat business, or maybe he was just walking around and went home. I was about to, too, when I realized I wasn't going to find the cat anyway. So you just got lost." Charles was surprised. "Yeah, that's how it works. And apparently, trying to get back, I started walking farther and farther away from home. By morning, I reached the city. I was cold, of course, tired and hungry. I figured I could take a bus. I've seen them around here. And I went the wrong way, of course. And to tell you the truth, it was probably the wrong bus. So I walked around the city for a few days and got to the other end of it, where, as I understand it, no one thought to look for me. I didn't sleep the whole time. I was afraid. But at some point my body couldn't take it, and I fell asleep right on a bench in the park. And when I woke up, I didn't remember anything. I went wherever I was going, and then my mom met me. That's the whole story." Around the same time that Molly Lisa's memories returned, Charles and Kathy decided to get married. Living in the same house, they became very close and found quite a few common interests. And Kathy's own children had long perceived her new husband as their father. He responded to them in the same way. Kathy fulfilled her childhood dream. Again entered the Institute at the Faculty of Economics and graduated with a red diploma. After that, her husband was happy to hire her at his company. The woman sold her second apartment and paid off Benjamin for his half of the living space. So they lived as a big, friendly family in a huge mansion, which was now theirs in common. As a memento of her adventures, Molly Lisa brought a huge white cat from somewhere. The street animal required a long course of treatment,